just following the prologue which I gave you. In the beginning, God expressed himself, and this was the expression that gave life and light and so on. And now I want to introduce you to the most important of Bible interpretation techniques. It's exactly the same technique that you would use for interpreting a dream. So you read as if you dreamed it. So we're going to tell a story as John told it, and pretend that this is a dream that you had last night, and see if we can interpret what this dream is saying just by what's written here. Because that's the technique to use all the way through the Bible. There are a couple of things that will throw you in Bible interpretation that make it very difficult, and that mean that you have to have research books handy in order to do it. I plan to remedy that at some point just by issuing a book that will give you these pointers, but that isn't available anywhere that I know of right now. The closest thing is Unity's Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. You might want to use that if you have access to it. What you want to know about is that there are certain words or phrases that are used over and over and over through the Bible, and they're used in a consistent manner, so that once you know what they mean, you can follow the meaning of the stories as they go all the way through. Then you need to know the interpretation of proper names of both people and places. Because wherever it talks about lands or land features, such as mountains, desert, I'm spelling desert. Mountains, desert, wilderness. Wherever it's talking about land or land features, you can always interpret them exactly the same. They're never used in a different way in different stories, so you don't have to figure out a different interpretation. If you've got a sort of a glossary, you can go through it and know that it means the same thing every time. Going into a mountain or a high place is going into a heightened state of consciousness or awareness to get communion from your source. It's especially mentioned by Moses in relation to Mount Sinai. And I just want to make a quick observation. I mentioned the name of the mountain earlier and told you that I would tell you something about that name. It happens that there are three words that you probably should know. The ancient Egyptian name of the Great Pyramid is Mer. The ancient Hebrew name of Mount Sinai is Merah. The ancient name of the mountain of Shambhala in India is Meru. All three of these names also mean backbone. And what's interesting about that is that the Indian idea, or Hindu or yogic idea, of there being 7 chakras within the body and ascending that spinal column is what these people are talking about in the ancient city of Shambhala, climbing the sacred mountain, climbing the ancient pyramid that was the place of initiation, climbing Mount Sinai that was the place of Moses' initiation. All of them took 7 days to make the journey. So there are these 7 stages of consciousness, which are again referred to in the Revelation as 7 seals on 7 books of knowledge. So these chakras, or wheels as they are called in another place of the body, are stages of consciousness, or 7 stages of consciousness, or 7 initiations. So there is that relationship of ascending the sacred mountain for communication with God. It's referred to again when David says, I will lift mine eyes unto the hills from which cometh my help. And then he says, my help cometh from the Lord. So going up into the mountains, into the hills, is going into a higher state of consciousness. A desert place is a place that is empty of features. And we find story after story of a man going into a desert place, which was dry and empty and fasting. Fasting we think of as going without food, but it's probably better understood in most instances here when men go into the desert for a period of time and fast. They are emptying themselves of ideas. I stop my own prejudices and I become empty in the desert, because immediately after the desert always comes a heightened experience. Now the same thing is not necessarily true of the wilderness. A desert is empty of features. So that's a place where I become empty of self and ready for the next step. The wilderness, on the other hand, is confusion. So wilderness is a state of confusion. And rivers and rushing water and springs and wells are particularly important because we're talking to a desert people. So people who live in a desert really have a relationship with these terms like living waters. Because to them, water is life. Finding water is what their lives are all about. So rivers, rushing water, springs, and wells are all places of living water coming up. Living water is consciousness that moves, awareness that moves. So we are baptized into the stream of life. And the stream of life makes the desert bloom. Our emptiness comes to life when the stream of life, light, awareness comes into it. That makes the desert bloom. So anything that refers to land or land features is referring to a state of consciousness and changing states of consciousness. By the way, I mentioned earlier, just as I began, the instruction of God to the children of Israel to destroy Jericho. And that was one that many of you reacted to when I said, God told them, break down the walls, leave nothing standing, not even one stone standing on another. Plow everything under the ground so there is nothing, absolutely nothing left standing. Kill every man, woman, child, and beast, and don't take any of the silver or gold. Now, what is that all about? Well, these things are all natural structures, but the walls that we build around ourselves are man-made structures. The walls that we have built around ourselves and our cities, which are within us, are full of people that live within us that maybe we should know something about. So let me just do a quick look at this from a psychological point of view for a moment. I was recently in India with Dr. Jean Shinoda Boland. She's the lady who wrote Goddesses in Every Woman. Dr. Boland is a Jungian analyst, and she did research work with people who were working with patients with multiple personalities. Now, this is cases like Sybil and the Three Faces of Eve, and the ones that you've read about who in one body are several different distinct personalities with different names and different character traits. And one human body might be inhabited by as many as 30 different distinct personalities with different names and maybe opposite sex, maybe man and woman in the same body, and some are young and some are old. And typically they don't know about the existence of one another. So here's a woman with 5 personalities in her, One is a man, and he is angry and mean and terrifying, violent, vicious, and there's a little girl in her that is very much the opposite, frightened little child, and then a very mature and secure businesswoman, and then a very unorganized, undisciplined woman, and so on, all in one human body. These analysts, in trying to integrate or do something with these several personalities in a person, were looking for some way to introduce the personalities to one another to see if they could cooperate and become one integrated personality. While they were doing their searching into these cases of multiple personality, they found an extra personality in each one. Now, that wasn't what they were looking for. They didn't want one more personality to deal with, but that's what they found. The extra personality that they found was a non-assertive personality, which made it very different from any of the others. This non-assertive personality had the same characteristics, same traits and characteristics in every patient. In every patient, always this non-assertive extra personality was just alike in every patient that they came across. It was, first of all, non-assertive. Number two, it was very loving. Number three, it was non-judgmental toward the other personalities living in the same body, even the personalities that were self-destructive. It was non-judgmental. It would not speak kindly. It would not criticize. It would not punish. It would simply accept all of those personalities. When it was asked by the analyst, can you help us to integrate these other personalities into one? This extra personality said, yes, we can, but only if all of them are willing. Only if all of the personalities in the body agree to it, then we will help to integrate. They came up with a term for this non-assertive personality, and their term that they used was the inner self-helper. And then these Jungian analysts got very bold and asked this inner self-helper about itself. What are you like? Who are you? What are you in this person? And they finally became specific enough to ask, are you God? And this non-assertive personality said, that is as good a term as any. Yes, we are the nature of God in this individual, and we are in all individuals. And when any individual calls on inner self-helper for help, the inner self-helper is there. Now, the interesting thing about this is that we've been told about a higher self by metaphysicians for centuries. And we have been told about the indwelling Christ or the inner Holy Spirit for 2,000 years by Christians. This inner self-helper seems to be the same thing that we refer to as Christ in me, or the Holy Spirit in me, or God in me. Because one of the things that they learned about these multiple personalities is that one personality could be diabetic and the other personalities were not. Get that? One personality in a body could have cancer, and when that personality was dominant, the cancer was active. When the other personalities were dominant, the cancer was in remission. What is this relationship between personalities and cancer and diabetes and other diseases? One personality could be allergic. The other personalities were not. One personality would be asthmatic, and none of the other personalities were. Didn't need treatment for that. And this inner self-helper seemed capable of healing the illnesses of those other personalities. So it would not throw out any of the personalities. It would introduce them then integrate them into one being. And was never asserted. The individual patient always had to seek out the inner self-helper by asking for its help. And the process for doing so is a process that sounds very, very much like prayer and meditation. Asking and listening. Asking for the highest within me to integrate me, and then listening for the instructions about the integration. So we're learning here, maybe this is where science and religion meet. Maybe we have finally found some evidence that there really is a higher self, that there is a seed of God in me that I can work with, that has healing capabilities, that can integrate my personality. And all of these things appear back a couple thousand years ago in the Bible. The dream starts in John, starts by saying there was a man sent from God whose name was John. And we need to find out, who's this man that appeared in my dream? I had a dream last night, and I dreamed that there was a man sent from God, and his name was John. Now, I don't know exactly how I know he was sent from God, but I just knew that in the dream. I knew that he came from God. And this man began to teach. And as he was teaching people, there were 3 people who came to question him about his teaching. And one of the people who came to question him was a minister, and one was a judge, and one was a school teacher. And when they questioned him, they questioned his authority in each of their respective disciplines. Are you teaching about God? Well, yes. I'm saying some things about God. Then are you a prophet? Oh, no, I'm not a prophet. Well, are you a lawyer? Do you have any right by law to judge these people? Oh, no, I have no such rights. And from the standpoint of education, are you the one that they said would come? Are you the Messiah? No, I'm not any of those things. So then the 3 authority figures in my dream who were questioning this man sent from God, whose name was John and who was teaching, I naturally, I can find who those 3 authority figures are within me. My Sunday school teacher in me, my intellect within me would question him, and the religious part, the educational part, the legal part, these are all parts of myself that I can recognize who these 3 were. So they come and they ask this John in me, who was sent from God, if you're not the Messiah, and if you're not an educational figure, or if you're not a legal figure, you're not from my background, who are you? What are you? We've got to report back to those who sent us. Who are you? And he answers, well, I'm just a voice coming out of all of your confusion. And saying, if you will set your priorities straight, make your path straight, if you will set your priorities straight on just one thing, you could have a higher teacher than I am. And then he says, I will tell you the nature of teacher that I am. I can teach you things that I see, that I hear, that I touch, that I feel. Now I have a handle on it. Here, this guy is my John mind. My John mind is a mind that can see, hear, feel, taste, touch, and he says, the things that I tell you come out of the things that you have just observed. Things that I tell you are like sheep, following one after another. The one thought comes out of the previous thought, and so on. That's my John mind. He has been my teacher all of my life. He's taught me everything that I know about life growing up, my John mind. But then one day, my John mind says, now remember, this is your story, this is your dream. One day, your John mind says to you, I hope you remember when this happened. One day in your life, your John mind said to you, there's more to life than this. Remember? Remember when that happened? At some time in your growing up, your natural John mind said to you, there's more to life than this. And you said, who's that? Who's talking? Is this God talking to me? No, not really. Am I having some kind of a mystical experience? No, not really. What's making me think that there's something more to life than, why am I thinking this way? Is it my education? Is it my instruction? What is it? And the answer that comes into my mind is, I'm just a little voice coming out of your confusion saying, there's more to life than this. And if you get your priorities straight, and you're not looking for other things out there, but you look for just one thing, he says, there's a teacher who comes after me who is preferable to me. Because I can only tell you the things that are seen and heard. I'm just a witness. I'm a teacher who can tell you what he has witnessed, and that's all I can tell you. But there is a higher teacher who's preferred before me because he existed before I did. He is your original teacher. And when he comes, he can tell you things about God because he's with God all the time. And so then you ask, in your dream, you ask your John mind another question. How will I know that it's him when he comes? If this higher teacher, this Christ, if he speaks to me, how will I know that that's Christ and not just more stuff out of my mind? And John answers, well, you know, when I teach you something, each thought comes out of the previous thought like sheep following a shepherd. And they all come out of observations of the senses, but when he speaks to you, it will be different. It will be as if heaven opened and a dove descended and landed on your shoulder. And something more you should know, when he speaks to you, it is predictable what he will say to you the first time he appears in your life. He will not say to you, you are a guilty, miserable, sinful little worm. He's not going to say that. What he's going to say when he descends out of heaven and lands on your shoulder, he's going to say, you are my beloved child in whom I am well pleased. He always says that. When you get in touch with your source, what you will hear is, you are my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased. And that's one of the ways that you'll know it's him when he speaks. You'll know that it's not your guilty conscience talking. You'll know that it's not your religious upbringing talking. You'll know that it is a loving being whose child you are, that is speaking to you not out of a previous thought, but just as if heaven opened up and a dove fluttered down and rested up on me. Not out of anything that I was trying to figure out, but it just lit on me and said, you're my beloved child, in whom I am well pleased. And when that happens to you, the next thing is also predictable. The next thing is, you want to get all the parts of yourself. There are, by the way, at least 12. There are at least 12. They are sometimes called the 12 apostles, but not usually. They are usually the 12 tyrants. Their names are like emotions and appetites and willfulness and anger and various different things about you that should be your servants. But until you take charge, they are your masters. They are what lead you around like with a ring in your nose, making you feel ways that you don't want to feel, making you do and say things that you don't want to say. These are 12 masters who should be 12 servants. But when the Christ appears and this wonderful feeling comes over you, I'm loved, I am accepted, I am all right. then you get excited and you think, I want to follow you. And in fact, your John mind says, that's him. Follow him. Now, unfortunately, only 3 parts out of the 12 go off to follow him, but that's enough. First of all, 3 parts of you go following after this newfound ideal of yours, and they get all excited and they start telling the other parts of you, and first thing you know, you are signing up for workshops, you're reading books, you're looking for people who are also interested in the same thing, and you even go so far as to think, boy, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. Are you recognizing any of this? This is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I just want to quit my job. I want to leave all of these things. I just want to devote my whole time to this. This part of the dream is called the marriage at Cana of Galilee. What happens is that one part of you that gets excited goes and gets another part of you excited. First of all, now you're a troop, and you're trooping on to Cana of Galilee to get married to the Christ. But you get there, and it gets to that moment of commitment, and the wine runs out. Isn't that interesting? Did that happen in your scenario? You got right there, and the wine ran out. So what happens next? The mother of the Christ appears. Oh, here's a new character appearing in my dream now. Who is she? I've figured out the 12 apostles or the 12 powers in me that are either tyrants, warriors, or they're servants to me. And I found that the Christ in me is the one who's attuned to God. In my John mind, I know what that is. But now here's the mother of Jesus showing up in me. Who is that? First clue, her name. Her name is Mara, a word that means bitter waters. Where were you the first time the Christ spoke to you? Perhaps in a dark night of the soul? Coming through your bitter waters? Was a bitter experience the mother of the Christ in you? Was that when you first looked for God? If so, when the wine runs out, she shows up again. And when you're back in the bitter experience again, she says to the Christ in you, the wine has run out. And he answers, what does that have to do with me? I'm not in charge of this body. But she, the mother of the Christ in you, turns to the 12 servants. If you're fortunate, this happens. She, the mother in you, turns to the 12 servants and says, whatever he says do, do it. When that happens in you, the water turns to wine again. And your inspiration is back, and the fire is back in the water. And it becomes a better wine than the one that ran out. Now it's solid. Now it's serving you. And now you're following in an organized way. A decision has been made. In every story in the Bible, we could go on with this story to the woman at the well and the other things that come up. What I want you to know is this gospel that is thought of as the biography of Jesus is the biography of Jesus in you. And what you have to know is that there's only one story in the Bible that runs from the beginning to the end. It starts with Genesis, it goes right through the Old Testament, and it ends with the book of the Revelation. And the characters are really the same all the way through. But it's written like a symphony with movements. It has one theme, but it goes through many, many variations on that theme and is one great symphony that ends in a complement to the beginning. The beginning says, there was a being. Before time and space existed, there was a creative being whose name was love. Love itself. And this being could do anything, have anything, be anything, accomplish anything, create anything, no boundaries, no needs, no lack or limitation, except one thing. Being the only being, the only life that lived, the only living thing, and being the very nature of love itself, he didn't have a lover. And so he reached into himself, removed his rib, and from inside himself took the tenderest part of himself, the bottom of his own heart. And out of that he fashioned for himself a beautiful woman. And he made her so beautiful, and he was so in love with her, that his heart leapt for joy. And as the Bible tells the story, the morning stars sang together at their love. But then he realized, if she is going to have the same experience that I have, she must choose me. I have chosen her, therefore I have love for her, and I know that love comes from me out of my choosing her, but she has no alternatives to me, and she can't make a choice. She can't have my experience, and I want her to have my experience. I want her to love me as I love her. So this great, loving, creative mind said, there have to be alternative lovers. And they have to be real enough, appealing enough, to actually compete with me, so that she can make a real choice. If she chooses me, it'll be because she loves me, really loves me. Not because I made the alternate lovers unappealing. I don't want to do that. I want to give them all the appeal they could possibly have. And so he created a great gift for his heart. He created a universe, spangled the night with the moon and the stars, created the sun, set it in heaven, and made a jewel that he called earth, and he offered that to his bride. He said, do you like it? She was absolutely fascinated with it. She went right into it and began to explore it. And he said, are you enjoying it? And she said, go away, I'm interested in this. And there's a verse in the Revelation that says, the Lamb of God was slain before the foundations of the world. You know what that says? God's heart was broken before the foundations of the world. Because her initial response was fascination with this dazzling thing. Well, it didn't really faze God a whole lot, because he had things to do. He had a wedding banquet to prepare, because he knew she'd only be gone for a moment. I mean, he had a lot of confidence in himself. And so he let her go, and she went into this great mystery, and she began to explore. And she came across popularity. And she married popularity and had his children. And the children were ever demanding on her to maintain her affair with popularity. She had to remain young and beautiful, and she always had to be performing. And she found that it was a wrenching, tiring experience to bear the children of popularity and fame and fortune. And she left it for money. She fell in love with money, and she went with that lover, and she had his children. And his children became more and more demanding, and took her time and wasted her energy, and she looked for something else, and she went to another and another and another alternate lover. And then we find this woman. In the middle of the Bible, there is this little book called the Song of Songs, the Song of Solomon. And there's this description of this lover of God. She's wandering through the streets of Jerusalem at night, saying to the watchmen at the gates and to the others that she encounters, I have a memory of a lover. He was like a prince, as I remember him. He owned the cattle on 1,000 hills. Have you seen anyone that looks like this? And they all said, no. No, and she kept going through the streets of Jerusalem at night and kept remembering this lover out of some kind of distant memory, trying to find him. And she felt tired and old and unclean and unwanted and rejected and alone. And somewhere in the streets of Jerusalem, she went to sleep. And out of the deep sleep, she was suddenly awakened by a light that had come in the room. A great shining light that was so bright and so sudden that it startled her out of her sleep. And as she awakened, she remembered having a dream of having been an old, tired woman. But as she woke up, she found herself to be a young virgin girl. And out of the light in the corner came a shining angel that said, "Hail, Mary. You are blessed of all women, because God is in love with you. And he wants to enter into you with his love. And you shall be with child. And you shall call that child Emmanuel, meaning God is right here inside you. And when you've given birth to this child and he grows into manhood, he will be your salvation, and that of all people. And what you have to know about that story is that Mary is not a girl in Nazareth 2,000 years ago. The dream is your dream, and whether you're a man or a woman, your soul has a womb, receptive to God. And what you need to know is that God is madly in love with you. And in our relationship here tonight, you're the sleeping one, and I'm Gabriel. And I'm here to say to you, wake up, wake up. God's in love with you, and you are so fortunate, because he wants to impregnate you with himself and allow you to bear his child. And when you do, he will grow into your own salvation, your own fullest, truest being, and will be the salvation of others as well. Wake up. Know who you are. And when you give birth to this child, wise men will be drawn to you, because they will recognize the child. And they will bring great gifts of admiration and adoration. And shepherds will be drawn to you. Those who follow their intuition and their thoughts, they'll be drawn to you. And the kings of the earth are not who you think they are. They're probably in your own family. They'll want to kill the child because it's taking their place in your life. So your own closest friends, the kings of your earth, the Herods, will want to assassinate the baby that you're giving birth to. And so in the book of the Revelation it says, take yourself to a high place with your child where the beast can't get to you, because he stands ready to gobble up the child at the moment it was birthed. But from the high place, he will not be marked with the mark of the beast, as you have been. The mark of the beast is the number of the appetites. You get yourself to a high place and you'll be protected. And in that highest state of consciousness, you'll be in touch with your source and will communicate with him. And you will build in the place of Jericho, where those walls of Jericho were torn down, and all man, women, beasts, children, and silver and gold, those were the old life and old values. All those men, women, children, and beasts were your actions, your thoughts, your emotions, your creations of the old life. And don't try to cling to the values, any values from the old life and bring it into the new, because you will corrupt the new with it. So when you tear down the walls of Jericho, plow it right under the ground and don't keep any of the silver or gold. Just drop it all the old life, so that the new one is not tainted. And get you into the high place on the top of the mountain, and there you will build a new city, a new Jerusalem, a new heaven and a new earth. And the light will shine in you, and your child will be the light. No need for sun, moon, or stars. The child that is born in you, he is your light and your enlightenment. And you will live in a kingdom called heaven. And that's a shortened version of the Bible from beginning to end. Just a few questions.
Paul, any comments about what's going on in Russia and China?
Okay, the question here is any comments about what's going on in the Soviet Union and around the communist countries and in China. I'd like to say this about it. Let me make my comment even more broad than that. For the last more than 15 years, I've been saying that there will come out of the communist movement something more beautiful, perhaps even than what we know as democracy. Because communism, as an initial concept, was practiced by the early Christians in Jerusalem, not as communism, but as commonism, sharing all things together. It's a beautiful concept, but turned into a dictatorship, the whole concept is destroyed and unworkable. So what has to happen is that has to fall and something new will rise. And we all feel wonderful about the fall of communism because they've been described as the enemy for many, many years. Of course, if you met the people on the street of Moscow, you wouldn't find their values very much different from the people on the street in Houston, at least as concerns peace. They want peace as much as we do, and they always did. They were not our enemies, they never were. But the systems looked at one another as enemies, so we rejoice over the fall of communism without realizing the Soviet Union just happens to have more resources than the United States has. And as they turn into a capitalist society, we might be sorry that their economy is now market-oriented, because they could grow into a much greater economy than ours unless we learn to restructure. And maybe we need to come out of something that I think is the mark, the herald of what some people have called the New Age. But the New Age I don't see as all this funny stuff that's going around. The New Age I see as, for the first time in history, people are having their own personal relationship with God. Instead of allowing religions and priests to tell them what to think. Instead of allowing governments to tell them what to think. With the breakdown of the Berlin Wall, the masses have begun to think with their own thoughts, and we are now our own high priests. And our religion is a new religion that is based on each one of us in individual relationship with God and with one another. And if we make this breakthrough in consciousness that allows all these communist countries to fall like dominoes as they are doing, perhaps we'll also make the breakthrough in consciousness that recognizes the godhood of one another. There isn't anybody that our government can point to right now and say, that's the enemy. Therefore, put your money into weapons so that we can hate someone. all of a sudden, there isn't the drive behind the war machine. And we have some other place to put our money, our time, our energy, instead of into destruction. What about Tiananmen Square? I prayed about that too. And you know, I have this thing that I call precipitation. It means that the environment around us, the interspaces of the universe, even within our body, are filled with this stuff that we were talking about before, this expression of God. That space in the atoms is filled by the presence of God. It is living, thinking, responsive beingness. And when a thought is impressed upon that, it begins to take form. And we can produce prosperity out of creativity. That's what is called, in old-fashioned terms, prayer, meditation, precipitation. Causing things to happen. Not by begging a God who doesn't hear well to do something he doesn't want to do for someone who doesn't deserve it anyway. That's not what prayer is all about. Prayer is calling on the nature of God within us to be creative and to produce prosperity, to cause things to happen. As I saw all those dominoes falling in Eastern Europe, my compassion went most of all to China and what happened at Tiananmen Square. And an interesting thing happened in my life at that moment. There was a girl who certainly had never heard of me. She grew up in the Cultural Revolution in China. She had to hide under the bedclothes with a candle and study the I Ching and the wisdom of ancient China, because in that time, within families, sisters would turn in sisters and they would be killed for reading the wisdom literature of ancient China. So she had to study in this hidden place, but she studied. And when Mao died, she went on into university. She got a master's degree in I Ching, of all things. And she was invited to come to the United States and do a doctorate in I Ching at the University of North Dakota. So this young Chinese girl has gone to North Dakota with the hope in her heart of finding the Christian God. But she came to North Dakota and she said, those people didn't know God any well that they knew him in China, and I couldn't find what this thing was about the Bible. And then I heard about Edgar Cayce, and I came to the ARE. And I found that Edgar Cayce was dead, and they were having this conference, and the only speaker that I could relate to was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who spoke of love. And then, while she was in Virginia Beach, someone gave her the telephone number of another girl who spoke Japanese. She happened to be a Japanese instructor, and she was hungry to talk with someone in something other than English. So she called this phone number just so she could have someone to speak with in Japanese. It was the phone number of my daughter-in-law, who lives with me. And they talked together on the phone. She came over to the house. We sat down and talked about what she was doing. She talked about getting a doctorate in I Ching, and I was hungry. Tell me everything you know. I want to know all that you know about the I Ching. And she looked at me rather strangely, and she said, I want to know all that you know about Christ. And here we were, coming together like this. And by the time she had left to go back to North Dakota, she said, I've been afraid to go back to communist China all this time. But she said, now I'm ready to go. Because I want to bring you to China to tell people what you're telling people here. So to me, that was the answer to my prayer. God will take you where you're willing to go and set up all these incredible coincidences that are just one after another. This great computer in the sky makes this space for you to go if you're willing to go. And that should be happening for every one of us. I think there should be magic in your life. I think you shouldn't be afraid to have magic in your life. And allow God to be real and alive in you. And allow magic. I'm using that in a very childlike sense of magic and miracles. Things can happen not in ordinary ways that we understand, but wonderful things can happen in spite of our understanding. And when we live in that kind of environment, things do happen like that. And we begin to live a life full of miracles and magic. And then we're really alive, far more alive than those people who explain things in scientific logic. At Harfai Lodge, where I've lived for the last few years, there's a kind of orchard out in front. And in the morning, on a cold morning, the frost is there on the ground and in the crotch of the trees, the fruit trees. And early in the morning, the sun comes up. Well, the sun doesn't come up exactly if you're educated. Because actually what happens is the Earth rotates on its axis relative to the sun, and thermal units known as photons come from the sun, and they touch the water that has frozen in the crotch of the trees, and the light units are turned into thermal units, and the water melts and it falls to the floor. That's if you're educated. But when I go out there, what happens is, in the early morning, I hear the scurrying of little feet running all over the ground. And I know that those are fairies and gnomes, and that they have gotten crystals out overnight, and they're trying to get them underground before the sun god can find them. And the heralds of the dawn come in pink and blue robes and announce the king is coming. And I stand there and I watch all these wonderful living things doing their magic in my yard. Now I choose to live that way. And nobody's going to take that away from me. Scientific terminology won't rob me of that. Everything around me is alive. And I live in a living, magical world because it's the way I want to live. It's my choice. And in my world, there are no enemies. I don't give people that choice either. There are only loved people in my life. So if I know you, I love you. And if you had planned to be my enemy, sorry, I don't give you that choice. I don't have enemies in my life, only loved people. And that's the way I want it, and it is my choice. And nobody can ever take that choice away from me. So I can live a life full of love with loved people. And live in a kingdom of heaven where everything is magic, and people can explain it away all they want to, but I still live with the magic. And that means everything is alive and living. And life is God. So I live in God, God lives in me, and together we work miracles, and we play together. And the only reason for it all is joy. Don't need any other reason to be alive than just to be joyous, expressing my source, the source of life and joy and happiness. Some say it's a school, and I suppose it is, but the best thing I ever got out of school was recess. And so I like to play now, and you know, I keep repeating the same lessons over and over, but every once in a while I learn one, and that's all right. And then I just keep playing. But that's what I think is going on in the world. I think that we are on the brink of the dawning of a new day in which we are going to have to relate in a different way. Finance is going to have to be structured differently, and I found it so fascinating that a long time ago in my meditations we were told, I do readings that some of you may know, or may not know about, but in one of these readings it said that the barter system will have to replace the current credit-based system in order to get economy back to a value-for-value relationship. Now that the East Bloc is opening up, they are finding that there is no money printed in the East Bloc that is acceptable to the West, so they're having to barter. So the barter system is the alive economy of the new age. And we have to learn to restructure things. And maybe we'll come out of the competitive mode into the creative mode, where we will learn that in order for me to have mine, I don't have to make sure that you don't get yours. One more question, I guess, then we got to go.
Why do we have two trees, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge? And
so that God's lover could choose him by choice, by wanting. God wants us to come to him out of our own desire and always to have a choice, and isn't in any hurry that we make our choice. God doesn't have a problem. He will wait as long as it takes us to discover that that's what we really want. And, you know, for as long as it's important to me to have my choice apart from God, I can be apart from God. When I say, I don't want any will but the will of God, then I realize that what I do is in my own best interest, because God's best interests are my best interests, and my best interests do not compete with your best interest. And then I enter a whole new kingdom. I live in a different space.
That would be, we would be then living under the tree of life and moving out from under the tree of knowledge.
Yes, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. What we do is that we finally realize that good and evil are not really real. I mean, darkness isn't something. It's the absence of something. It's the absence of light. Evil isn't something. It is the absence of good, or it's the presence of fear. Or put it another way, nobody will ever be unkind to you unless they're hurting. It is natural for us to be loving and full of life and good to one another. And if anyone is unkind to you at all, for any reason, they are in pain, and their unkindness is a symptom of a disease. And what we've been doing in living under the law of good and evil, that knowledge of the tree of good and evil, is we've been catching each other's diseases. Every time you're unkind, I get angry right back. When I find out I'm a healer, you can be sick if you want to, but I don't have to catch your illness. You can be unkind to me, but I will recognize that's a symptom. Aha, now you're a patient and I'm a healer. I'm not going to be your victim. I'm not going to catch your disease. I'm just going to try to love you back to health. And I believe that when we, you and I, individually, personally, and I really mean this intensely personally, when you and I lay down our weapons that we use against each other inside our own families and homes, and even against ourselves, when we put down our weapons, we can stop pushing our government toward nuclear disarmament. Disarmament will happen on that level because it has happened on the personal level. Personal disarmament means being no longer willing to throw an epithet back when one is thrown at you by the person you love the most. You have 2 black bags that you carry around with you, nuclear arms. In one side is names that your partner doesn't want to be called. And you know just what they are, and so you've got them ready to pull, just like 6 guns. On the other side, you've got past indiscretions of your partner. Those are your nuclear armament. Now, if you're willing to empty those bags and love one another, and not feel that you have to return evil for evil, just learn the tree of life, and not knowledge of good and evil, not judgment of good and evil, just life, and be a life supporter. Don't try to make people less alive by criticizing them and gossiping about them. That's our attempt to kill people. Make them alive by praising them, by smiling at them, by, you know how fast you can be a healer? How long does it take you to force someone else to smile when they didn't want to? Disease is contagious, terribly contagious. There is an epidemic, as you know, going around the world right now. It's an epidemic called This epidemic is the most dangerous epidemic that's ever hit mankind. People are scared. They're scared of you. You know, when people meet you at a cocktail party, did you know that they're actually scared of you? Am I right? Maybe I should say it the other way. You're scared of them, aren't you? You're thinking, oh, I hope I look all right. What's she going to think about me? Have we got the butterflies in the pit of our stomach? And we meet each other with fear because we're afraid you aren't going to like me. Listen, if I take care of my own needs about that, I know I am my responsibility. And I need to be loved. Guess whose problem that is? It is distinctly mine. And if I try to get you to solve it, or my wife to solve it, I'm going to find out she can't. She tries. But then every once in a while, she's not all right with her, and she wants my attention, and I want her attention, and you know how it is. This experiential unit, body, mind, personality, spirit, whatever I am, this is mine, and it needs love. And I have a lot of love to give. And if I start by giving it to me, and no, when I shake hands with you, I don't have to wonder, what is she thinking about me? I'm going to have sense enough to know she's not thinking about me. She's wondering what I'm thinking about her. I mean, that's only common sense to know that. She's not thinking anything about me, so I don't have to worry about my hair or whether my fly is unzipped. She's worrying about whether her lipstick is on straight. So when I reach out to shake hands with you, I don't have to wonder if you're going to love me or not. If you don't love me, it's all right. I am loved. I took care of that myself. And if you don't love me, it's just because you don't know me well enough. I'm lovable. And I know I'm going to love you. And the only excuse we ever have for not loving one another is that maybe I caught you at the wrong time. I might have caught you at the time when you're being your meanest and your nastiest. But, you know, if I caught you at a time when you were being your best, I should be smart enough to know that there are moments when you are absolutely rotten. I know that about you. I mean, let's don't pretend that we don't know about that about each other. There are times when you're absolutely mean. It's all right. I love you. And I don't have to catch you at the right moment to know that I love you. I love you, all that you are. Because that's my choice, and that's the way I want to live. When I love me, and you love you, and we come together, there's no competition. We're not afraid of each other. We're not susceptible to frays, or cancer, or any number of a host of other diseases. We can build healthy selves. Body, mind, spirit, personality, the whole way through by giving ourselves the love that we need as our own personal responsibility. Then share it with one another. We'll heal relationships. We'll heal our economy in Texas. And we will heal our economy in America and our economy around the world. And nations won't war against nations because people don't fight against people in their own homes. And people don't fight with themselves between the two hemispheres of their own brains, for goodness sake. I mean, when was the last time you called yourself stupid? The last time you stumbled, right? You said stupid, and there was one side of your brain hurling an epithet at the other side of your brain. There was this little child in you that stumbled, and the parent in you said, look at you, you're making a fool of us again. We got war going on inside our own heads. We've got to heal ourselves, heal our relationships, heal our community, heal our nation, and heal the world. And then we'll not only live in the kingdom of heaven individually and personally, but we will lift our planet into the new heaven and a new earth. That's all we have time for. Thank you for coming.